Welcome everybody to the digital clinic at Chalfont Consulting. My name is Lachlan, for those of you I haven't met. I'm the hub lead for delivery transformation here at Chalfont. I look at anything from Agile coaching, Scrum Mastery, product ownership, modern delivery practices and those bits and pieces. In terms of the agenda, we are looking at just setting up that Agile culture. How do you actually start to build that into your company, into your team, into yourself? We'll be going through things like being Agile versus doing Agile. A lot of people are probably doing some of the Agile steps, but are they necessarily actually being it themselves? We look at anti-patterns, and don't worry, I'll explain deeply what anti-patterns actually are and how you kind of identify them and how do you start to look for solutions for those anti-patterns. We talk a little bit about customer/team centricity. I know a lot of people start to concentrate on customer centricity now, but how do you look at teams as well, and what sort of audience are you looking for in your role and your organization? A little bit around self-direction for teams, self-direction for individuals. What are you looking for? How do you empower people to do that? Experimentation is just what it is, experimenting. Don't just stick with the first thing you see, a first technique that you use. Try and build it to your specifications, to your team, to your culture, to your business. Collaborative networks, how you actually work with others, how you actually build those networks within an organization. And then finally, we'll finish off with that growth mindset and that difference between really just doing and being. Agile is not just frameworks. There's principles, there's values behind it, and a mindset at the very, very deep core of it. A lot of organizations, a lot of teams will start instantly looking at the techniques on the far right instead of actually building it from the left, where you're starting to look at those values and principles along the way. So raise your hand here if your team does Scrum or does SAFe. Yeah, there's a few out there. Do you know the origins of it in terms of why the organization did it, or is it just something that you came into and there was something they were just doing?
They're just doing it.
Yeah. And we find that all the time. The teams are just doing these things because they've been told this is the technique to use, this is the framework to use. This is a technique in a workshop, how to be more agile. But it's where those actually come from, and the reason behind them is what you're actually looking for when you're looking at a lot of these being agiles rather than necessarily doing agile. So right down the other end, we have the being agile. This is more about the mindset. This is how you apply it to everything, not just to a framework or a technique, but throughout your entire job, throughout your entire organization. It's a big difference between the two, and today we'll kind of show you how to meet them together. One of the big things that we get into are anti-patterns. What is an anti-pattern? It's a common response to a recurring problem that is often counterproductive. So often we try to find solutions to pieces, and these solutions are not always right. And that's when a solution is not right, we start to find that they actually turn into an anti-pattern. They're actually taking away, they're counterproductive when they were trying to solve something else. So for example, some of the really clear ones is directing the what and how. Teams need clear direction to build that independence, to be that self-directing team. So giving them the what is really important, what they're trying to build, what problem they're trying to solve. But often people slip from that what into how to do their job, tell you how to actually do it, leaving the team no creativity, no flexibility. You get into micromanagement when you start to talk about the hows. Lots of managers end up doing this and telling the team, we need to know every single little task you're doing, rather than necessarily just giving you the problem to solve and letting you freely go and solve that problem with creativity, with your skill sets, with your knowledge that you've already built yourself. Because quite often you find that team leaders, they're not experts in everything. They only know a little slice, and it's you guys as the team generally build that up and can fill out the rest of that. So give them the problem, not necessarily the steps by steps. Another really common one is product owners or proxy product owners or unavailable product owners. Product owners are there traditionally to give you quick, decisive decisions on a product direction. When they start to become a part-time job for somebody, or they're too far up the food chain that they're not actually there on a day-to-day basis, it just delays the process of actually making those decisions and becomes a bit of a bottleneck. So it's there to help create and speed up that thing, but the anti-pattern is when they start to become unavailable, when they start to become proxy and they don't really have that decision-making power, they're no longer effective. It's become like an absolute counterproductive move to something that you're trying to solve. And the last one, analysis paralysis. I think probably most people have done this at some point. It's really good to analyze things. It's really good to get that information so you make a good decision based off where you're going. But at a point, you get too far down there, you get too far into the weeds, and you're never actually making a decision. The analysis was meant to help you clarify a decision, not get so deep that it actually even makes it harder to decide. And that's another anti-pattern that you do hit. So, any questions about what anti-patterns actually are? Has anybody actually seen an anti-pattern before? Get some nods?
All the time, right?
Yeah.
All the
I've seen
time.
a lot of product owners being hired
with no context.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a role that people hear about and they go, our team should have a product owner. They hire them, but they've got no real scope, no real decision-making power. They just end up being a really expensive messenger that just has to go up to the secretary, then back down again, or back to the senior manager, and they just become this really expensive messenger rather than actually speeding up the process by having decision-making within the team, within close to that kind of group. So how do you actually identify anti-patterns in their solutions? First off, look for the events, behaviors, and techniques that no longer meet their original intent. So your team might have events that they go through or techniques you use. You might have things like sprint planning or backlog refinement. You might use a tool like Jira or Agile to actually organize your work. But if it's not actually reaching that original intent that it was implied for, it's starting to probably become an anti-pattern. So look for those ones, those behaviors, even the types of meetings you have or how you run meetings. They might be causing you to have anti-patterns rather than actually meeting that original intent. So those are things you're looking for. Once you actually have started to identify those, or you think it might be an anti-pattern or leading to an anti-pattern, explore the issue. Try and figure out what did it actually intend to solve? What was the original problem or thing that has been implemented to solve or speed up or better or improve? Give yourself time to actually understand how it may have evolved from where it was first implemented to what it is now. Because often when it was first introduced, maybe it was perfectly fine and it met that need and actually helped the team. But over time, as the team's changed, as the work may have changed, the actual technique or framework hasn't. And you end up with this anti-pattern because it no longer matches what you need as a team or a group. And then finally, how do you actually get into the solving part? You start to solve through the actual experiments that you conduct. You can experiment with that actual technique, that framework, that behavior to try and bend it back to meeting the original intent. Or it might just be scrapping it all together. That might be the other option. So it's really important that you start to experiment. You don't need to settle on the first experiment. You don't need to settle on that first solution to it or resolve. You can keep pedaling around, trying to figure out a better way that you can use that framework technique or get rid of it or implement something else. Often we jump way too often to the very first solution that we think of, and then we just leave it there. We never look back to see if that worked. We don't really time box it. And we'll talk a little bit more about experiments later on. So next we had was customer and team centricity. Now, I'm hoping that a lot of you have heard about customer centricity, putting them in the center of your focus, understanding that that's who you should be building your products for, who you should be delivering to. Often what's missed these days and what's becoming more and more popular is around the idea of team centricity. So this is probably more aimed at people who are in leadership teams or part of the team as a leader or a director or some sort of guidance. The idea that as a leader, it's no longer the customer that you look out for, the Mr. and Mrs. Smith on the street as a civilian, but you're starting to look at your team as a customer to you. You're providing them a service of leadership, you're providing them a service as a Scrum Master, as a PO or whatever it is, to make sure that they can focus on what they need to focus on, and that is delivering to the actual customer at the end of the line. So the idea is that your service is providing them with clear guidance of what they should be building, or at least some ideas around that. It should be giving them the frameworks which are best to fit the team to make them as efficient as possible. It should also be making them comfortable to work there and making sure that they have everything they need in terms of resources and time to deliver on what they need to the customer. So while some people are focusing on the customers, the actual end users, other people in leadership positions, if you are a head of a team or a leadership role, you'll start to focus on the actual team itself as your customers individually. So you still have customers, you're just stepping one step back. Let your team, the really experienced people who know what they're doing for their customers, deliver for that customer. You just make sure that they have everything they need to deliver for that customer. Any questions about customer or team centricity?
When you say you, do you mean like the Scrum Master?
Could be a Scrum Master, could be a team lead, anybody who's responsible for a group of people or are doing some sort of activity or role that supports them to actually deliver to that end user. So you might identify yourself in this one as one of the team leaders who's delivering to, whose customer is the team. You might identify yourself as someone who's in that team and delivering to an external user. But you can use this both ways in terms of, you need to talk up and be like, who are you delivering to, my manager? Are you delivering to us or to outside? The next one we have is the self-direction side of things. So autonomous teams which solve the problem, not just deliver a solution. So often teams are told to deliver a solution, that's all they get. Start with the problem, telling them the what they need to solve, not necessarily how they're actually going to solve it by giving them the solution. We try it as team leads, as employees to hire other really good minds. We try to hire people who are good in their skill set, who are creative, who meet all these behaviors. We have generally several rounds of interviews to get through to them. So we should be trusting the people that we're hiring, that they're actually experts within their field or have a good knowledge or already have the behaviors and attitudes to be really good at these kind of things. So give them the trust by giving them the solution and letting them work out how to actually solve, give them trust by giving them the problem and let them work out what the solution is through their creativity, through their experience, through their understanding of the tools and the abilities that you can actually have. Provide them with that mission and the resources they need, not with the step-by-step guidance. They'll come and ask you if they need help with step-by-step, but let them have that and then let them go on from there. Because as soon as you start to tell them how to do it, the creativity goes away, they're just following those steps or tasks along the way, and they stop actually thinking, how can I do this the best way possible? Because who knows, they probably know a little bit more about their particular skinny field than you do as a leader. They're often especially great when you have things like grads in your team, because they often just come out of university where they've learned some of the latest techniques and some of the newer stuff, and they can actually apply that, but they get into an old school team who do it a different way, and they have to start going backwards to really traditional ways to actually deliver something. Especially when you talk about developers. They learn some really cool stuff at uni that you don't necessarily get in the field. To be successful, or to be a successful self-directed team, they need to have a few things. They need to have that collective responsibility, and that's when you give them that problem to solve. They kind of solve it together rather than just being given individual tasks and being siloed to their individual tasks. They need to have harmony and trust. It's really about that team building, making sure they work together. You've got to go through those stages of norming, storming, forming to actually build that team that's working well together. They need encouragement. Sometimes teams, their solutions might not work the first time, so you've got to encourage them as a leader to be like, try again, learn from it. It's not about failing, it's about learning and growing and developing. Shared goals really comes back to that collective responsibility. If they believe they all own a problem, they actually start to build their goals together as well. It's not individual goals for individual roles, it's about a goal for the whole team, for the whole product itself. And then finally, strong communication. Make sure they have the platforms and the tools to actually communicate. If you're too restricted with it, it can be a real problem. We also discussed an anti-pattern before where you have too many channels to communicate and things get lost. Sometimes you just need to pick as a team where you communicate, how to communicate, and someone needs to facilitate that communication, which is often that team leader. That's self-directed teams. Often when you get to a really good stage with a self-directed team, the team leader just ends up being there as a caretaker, helping them bounce ideas, trying to help them move forward, encouraging them. It's less about like divvying the work, breaking it up. These teams can kind of take care of themselves. They just need a little bit of guidance every so often. And that's how it should end up being. You can concentrate more on like professional development within a team, making sure people are happy individually rather than necessarily managing the work. So next we have experimentation. A lot of what we've been talking to today is actually going to lead into some experimentation. We're going to do a quick activity after this. You can experiment throughout everything. Tools, frameworks, structures, teams, projects. You can write an experiment for just about any sort of aspect of work life. Every organization, every team, and every individual work differently. So not every framework, every project, every type of work is going to work for you. And you need to experiment with those pieces, those techniques, those behaviors, those frameworks to make sure it's tailored to your team. Because these frameworks were built by people who are just trying to put out the best thing that they can think of for this scenario that they're currently in. And you're not always going to be in the same scenario, so you need to adapt them to your team. So really common one again is we see Scrum as a framework that a lot of people adapt and use. Really good teams, you'll see this, that they start to manipulate it better and better for their team to use, and they follow less of the Scrum guide, but take the principles underneath that it was theirs to actually deliver on. And an experimentation just gives you that ability to balance it, to find the good things between following a framework and meeting something that actually serves you a better purpose. And we all know experimentation leads to continual learning and improvement. And that's the idea of any team, right? You don't necessarily need the greatest team straight away, but it's about making those 1% improvements along the way. So every single month, every single sprint, every single quarter, you're just a little bit better, a little bit more efficient, a little bit happier as a team moving forward. But experiments made up of a few steps. First, always give your experiment a name, or you can put a team name up there. So as you can see right up here, this is the super cool team. This is the super cool experiment we're going through. If you can, put the related anti-pattern, what you're actually trying to solve, what is the issue your team's having, the process, something there. Try and identify it, put it up there. So this one, absent product owner. The original intent, what you were trying to achieve and what you're trying to achieve through this experiment. Quick and decisive project decisions. A hypothesis, what you think will happen if we execute on this experiment. If we have an empowered product owner who is present within the team, we'll make better and faster project progress. The steps, the actual experiment itself, what are the steps you need to take to execute on this experiment? Get those down. You can assign those to people who actually does those steps. You can actually put times on them. I always like to really put those steps into the Jira boards, into your Scrum Kanban boards, so that they're part of the next sprint, the next cycle that you're going through. Success, what's the proof? What will you see that actually proves that your experiment's going well? Give yourself some success measures in there. And then finally, a time frame or time box to go through. Actually have a point in time where you go, we finished the experiment, let's review and look back. Let's see if we've met our hypothesis. Let's see if those success markers are there. Let's see if we actually executed all the steps. And this is the kind of thing that you should be identifying at things like retro, when you start to do some of that, identifying what's not going right for you guys and moving from there. The next topic we had was collaborative networks. It's about being more than just part of the team. Obviously within workplaces, we have immediate teams that we're a part of and we're trying to be there for that team, but it's about going beyond that. You're not just part of a team, you're part of a branch, you're part of an organization, you're part of a whole community of people, whether that be through your capability, through your discipline, through the types of projects that you do, through the division that you're actually within in that workplace. To build those collaborative networks, look for other people who are leads with that capability, with that skill set you've got. Make sure that you're knowing who those are across the organization, not just within your team. So if you're a BA for a certain project team, you might reach out to other BAs in other project teams, because while they're not working on the same topic, they'll have skills and knowledge that they can share, either about the environment itself that they're in, about the tools and techniques they use there, or about a history of projects in the organization. So building those networks around capabilities is a really good way to start, and then you can start reaching beyond your own capabilities, so your own skill set. You might start reaching out to other PMs, you might start reaching out to change managers, you might start reaching out to other directors of different portfolios, you might reach out of the technology space if that's where you are as well, into security, into infrastructure, into all sorts of things, into policy. Really good to build those networks. And from that, it's all about knowledge sharing. So while some people might not feel like they're the expert in the field, that there's others out there, even sharing a little bit of your knowledge gets knowledge sharing replicated back. Because once you share a little bit, people are more likely to share back with you. You may have seen this through little groups where they call them little communities. You might have like a BA community or a Scrum Master community within your place, and they can start to share information between them. Once you start sharing, other people share more back. So build that by sharing, by even putting it out there, even if it's just a small technique you have. If you know, like a little quick tip on the project management tool you're using, it's like, yes, then say how do you highlight these, or put comments on there, or link these. You'll start to build up that trust and build up that knowledge sharing. Expecting people to go beyond their team, give people in the team space to go beyond that, to work outside of the team, not just 100% committed to what you're doing. Give them that 5%, 10% of time, a week, a month, whatever, to go out to other teams, to see how they're doing it, to see how techniques are doing it. You can do little exchange programs where people like come for a stand-up or come for a planning session with another team to see how they do it, so you can adapt those principles, bring them back, and then replicate it with that other team as well. Co-designing with your customer, making sure you bring your customer into those decisions as well, whether that be the actual team members or whether that be the product that you're actually trying to build. Bring those customers in, make sure that they're a part of it, build them into your community of working, and then focus on the bigger picture, not just the individual tasks. That real collaborative network. I know everyone's got their role, everyone's got their thing that they need to deliver to the team, the thing that they're responsible for, but start to view it higher. Look at the whole project. Look at how that project fits into the program of work. Look how that program work is actually trying to deliver on X, Y, Z objectives overall. Once you can see that, you can definitely see ways around it and ways to help better what you're actually delivering, to not just service your little role or your little particular part of it, but to service the whole program and actually end up with a better customer or user experience along the way. All right, growth mindset. Now, this is probably right at the very core of any sort of agile environment or getting that agile culture running at your organization or within your team. Generally, there's two ends to this scale. There's the fixed mindset and there is the growth mindset. It's not that you're one or the other, or anybody is one or the other. You're generally on that scale somewhere in there. And it's not bad having a fixed mindset. It's just you want to keep pushing towards more and more of those growth opportunities. And as you mature in terms of this side, you will pick up more and more. It becomes part of your behaviors and the actual way that you think about work, the way you think about how you interact with people, the way you think about delivering on pieces. So fixed mindset avoids challenges, unable to handle criticism or feedback, constantly seeking approval, threatened by others' success. Failure is the limit of ability, and stuck in their way. And I know Matt mentioned before the idea that some people want all the tasks written out of them, so there's no chance of them failing because they just do exactly what they're told. Because that's, fear of failure, right? If they're given the exact list and they just do that exact list, they can't fail because they've been told what to do. It's not their responsibility. On the other hand, you have growth mindset. views challenges as opportunities to learn, opportunities to understand more, opportunities to build something really, really cool for their customer. Learns to give and receive criticism. It's not just about giving it, but also receiving it as well, how you take it on board and how you give out good criticism, not just chaotic criticism. Prioritizes learning over seeking approval. Happy to take that little bit of risk, try something a little bit different rather than always just seeking for that protection of approval along the way. I like to say that it's ask for forgiveness rather than permission. I'll go out there and do it, and if I stuff it up, I'll say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, rather than waiting for someone to say, oh yeah, now you can go do it. Inspired by the success. It's not about competing, it's about being a cheerleader for your team as well. With someone in your team that actually succeed with something, someone in your capability succeed with something, celebrate it because they'll celebrate you back and you can grow as a group rather than becoming more and more isolated and more silent. And finally, so the last two, failure is an opportunity to grow, learning from that failure, trying to get better, trying to improve on yourself and the team and the product, and then able to adapt to new habits. The idea that you're bringing on something new, you're changing, you're ready to change your behaviors based off information you learn rather than stuck in your way. So that's a growth mindset. Probably at the very core of what being Agile is rather than just doing Agile. If you are far down the left-hand side or you do a team is kind of far down the left-hand side, you'll find it much more difficult to actually benefit from a lot of the Agile techniques and frameworks. Whereas if you start to move to the right-hand side, you'll see that you benefit more and more from those frameworks because that's the kind of mindset they built these frameworks for. Setting an Agile culture. It's not just about one of these techniques or one of these parts. It's about building them all together. It's all building blocks. A culture takes a really long time to build and it's a very short time to tear it down. So it's something that you constantly chip away at. It's something that you need to repeat every single day. And sometimes that's really hard because you forget about it. You don't go a day without it. You go 2 days without it. You go 3 days without it. You go a sprint without doing an experiment. Then you go 2 sprints without doing an experiment, 3 sprints without doing an experiment, and it's no longer part of your behavior. It's no longer part of your skill set. And that's where those building blocks fall away. So to getting to an Agile culture, there is no silver bullet, you're just all of a sudden there. And you're never going to be at the point where you're like, we are a pure Agile culture. It's always a growth, it's always a journey, and you're always going to be improving upon it. And it takes a lot of discipline to make sure you're still doing all of these skills and techniques that we've talked about today to apply it continuously to what you're doing. All right, thank you very much, everyone online. Really appreciate it. Have a good evening, and we'll catch you at our next Agile clinic. Digital clinic.